As opposed to the 50s, which are considered an age of prosperity, the 60s are going to be an age of revolution and massive change that sweeps across the country. The 1960s started with this ambitious hope for continued prosperity and this new decade of excitement and wonder. After 8 years of Eisenhower's presidency, the economy was pretty strong. Plus, the baby boom had created a whole new era of people who were invested in consumerism and working hard. Space exploration had begun. We were fighting to preserve democracy everywhere thanks to the Truman Doctrine, and it looked like we were starting to win the Cold War. There was a while where Eisenhower actually thought that he would run for a third term of president. However, in 1951, the 22nd Constitutional Amendment was passed that limited the presidential elections to only 2 terms in office. So someone new was going to win the election. But who was that going to be? So there's two main guys who are going to run for office. The Republicans are going to pick Eisenhower's vice president, Richard Nixon, hoping to capitalize on Nixon's connection with the popular general and president. He was relatively popular, although he had been involved in some of the communist witch hunts with McCarthy. There was a couple of small scandals in terms of people saying that he had taken kickbacks and bribes and that type of thing, but nothing was validated, and he, had some charisma to him as well. Henry Cabot Lodge was selected as his running mate. Henry Cabot Lodge had been in the Senate for quite some time, so also had fairly decent name recognition. So things seemed pretty sure set on Nixon winning the election. He squared off against the Democratic candidate, however, a young Massachusetts senator by the name of John F. Kennedy. I will try to not get too into Kennedy, but anyways, he was a youthful man. He came off as vibrant and strong. He had very strong political connections as well. His father had been an ambassador at one point and had quite a few powerful friends, mostly through bootlegging money, but never mind that fact. And JFK was also considered a World War II hero. If you recall, his PT-109 boat had exploded during a battle in the Pacific in World War II. And, he dragged his wounded soldiers with his broken back through shark-infested water miles to a nearby island, or something like that. Anyways, the biggest thing standing in his way, besides his age, was his inexperience and the fact that he was a Roman Catholic. And this worried many constituents because we had never had a Catholic president. His response to this, however, was, "Nobody asked my brother if he was a Catholic or Protestant before he climbed into an American bomber plane to fly his last mission," referring to his older brother, Joe Jr., who was killed in an air raid in World War II. After making this statement, Republicans did not press the issue of his religion any further. He's going to pick for his vice president, a guy by the name of Lyndon Baines Johnson. LBJ, as he was known, was not exactly the most popular of people. He kind of was a strangish man, very decent politician, mind you. He knew how to play the game of politics fairly well. He was chosen as JFK's running mate, however, more so because he was a Texan. And JFK, while fairly popular in the North, didn't have a lot of support in the South, partially due to JFK's feelings on race relations. He was very for promoting desegregating schools further, advancing civil rights and those types of stances, which were unpopular with the Democrats of the South. So he hoped to have a Texas Democrat in LBJ balance out the ticket to gain those key Southern Democratic votes. In terms of campaigning, JFK campaigned on the idea that sacrifices are going to have to be made. He's like, we all have to work together in order to advance America. We're all going to have to give up some stuff in order to advance America. His goal was to get the U.S. to a safer time. He wanted to end those witch hunts against the communists within the country, which did earn him the reputation as being soft on communism. He also wanted to end the nuclear threats and this whole fear and the idea of MAD, mutually assured destruction. This theory that, if one of us or Russia detonated a really bad bomb, well, the other was going to, and so we would both destroy each other. Nixon is going to argue that it was possible to decrease tensions with the USSR as well. And so he is going to focus a lot of his campaigning on foreign policy, while honestly, though JFK did touch on foreign policy, his heart lay closer to domestic issues. What was most important about the campaigning for the 1960 election is this is the first presidential election that used television. And so you had this debate, you actually had a series of debates where the two men are going to square off on national television. And again, this is a time where there's not a lot of channels, so most people watched this. And they're going to, just answer a series of questions related to the campaign and the presidency. Before the televised debates, Nixon was leading the polls very, very clearly. Um, After the televised debates, JFK was now on top. And a lot of people say that the reason for this switch was partially due to Nixon's appearance. Nixon happened to be ill the day of the first televised debate. And so he kind of was pale and he kind of was swallow and he had a little bit of a 5 o'clock shadow going in. And he looked sick and he looked like he was in pain. Whereas you have JFK, who's young and tall, and he looks strong, and he's really tan. Um, and so those who watched the debate, they thought, oh, well, JFK looks like the stronger candidate, so let's vote for the stronger candidate. People who listened, however, said Nixon easily had won the debate. And it's important to note that despite their appearances, in reality, um, JFK was actually very, very ill. He had a number of diseases that he suffered from for most of his life, including Addison's disease, which leaves you tan. It just dyes your skin, basically, as well as osteoporosis. He actually had received the final rites a couple of times because he had been so close to death from these various diseases. Nonetheless, this was the first time people watched it, and the housewives watched these debates, and they thought, JFK's pretty. Let's vote for the pretty guy. So he's going to win. Um, something along those lines. There's a lot of other scandals about why JFK won the election. One rumor is that his father hired mobsters in Chicago to go and register to vote using different aliases so they could vote different multiple times for JFK, kind of rigging the election. Um, so there's a chance that my beloved JFK didn't win completely fairly, but regardless, he is able to win by a margin of 303 electoral college votes to Nixon's 219. And this shows who carried which states. It is important to note that there was a Dixiecrat also up for it on Byrd, but he didn't really do very much of importance other than carry 2 southern states. So, JFK is our president. JFK becomes the 35th president of the United States. He is the youngest man ever elected president, not the youngest president ever. And he was the first Catholic president. He is going to follow many of the policies of Truman and Eisenhower. He is going to kind of try to blend the two. He's going to start by building a nuclear arsenal, because he does want to have these weapons prepared. But unlike Eisenhower, who I just referenced used MAD a lot, the mutually assured destruction theory, as a threat, like, look at how much we got, look at how much we got, I'm not scared to use it. JFK preferred to have what he called flexible response. So he said, let's use diplomacy, and if diplomacy doesn't work, at least we have a backup arsenal that we can depend on. So he's also going to strengthen our military forces. One thing that JFK is going to do is create special ops called the Green Beret, whose job it is to go into combat zones and in other countries and help them with their military might. He's also going to use the Green Berets to do some reconnaissance work and some advanced work of regular quote military troops going into places. So they're just an elite military group. Also, in terms of foreign policy, he is going to try to find ways of aiding countries in terms of not using the military. He figured, maybe some of these countries, kind of like what we're doing with the Marshall Plan, where we were giving money or financial assistance to these other countries and helping them rebuild, maybe we could do that to other areas as well, and that would indebt them to us, at least in their hearts, making them, fairly ingratiated to fall towards our side. Now, this is going to be particularly true in terms of Africa. I give you a little activity there that you would like to do. We're going to consider a homework assignment for you to turn in. Obviously not going to partner up, but on a sheet of paper, after you've read the slide, come up with a list of 10 ways that you think that you could help other countries besides just sending in military force. And we're going to be handing these in tomorrow. You might want to hit pause because I'm going to continue with the slideshow, however. One of the first things JFK is going to do, non-militarily, to try to help other countries, is to create what's called the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps sends American volunteers, people who want to be a part of the Peace Corps, over to countries that are developing, poor, whatever, and tries to help them. They create schools, they make buildings, they help with medicine, and they also help learn new agricultural practices, as well as iodizing the water and those types of activities. He creates, as the head of the Peace Corps, a man by the name of Sergeant Shriver, who will get married to JFK's sister Eunice, and they have a child named Maria, who marries Arnold Schwarzenegger, although now they're divorced. So by marriage, for a while, Arnold Schwarzenegger was JFK's nephew. Just a really random fun fact. One area in particular that JFK was really, really concerned about was Africa. In the 1960s, a lot of the African countries are going to gain their independence for the first time in hundreds of years. They've been colonized by mostly Europeans for the various resources that the continent offered. Everything from diamonds to wheat to gold to, of course, humans, sadly. And after they've been colonized for hundreds of years, and then suddenly these countries, abandon their colonies and these new nations emerge, these new nations lacked nationalism, they lacked resources, and they lacked strong governments. They didn't have allies, they didn't have clear-cut leaders or ideas how to run themselves, and so there's a lot of issues within Africa. So JFK is going to call for an increased amount of economic aid to Africa. It's going to be one of the main places that he starts by sending the Peace Corps to. The U.S. is also going to double the amount of loans that we offer to African countries during the JFK years in an effort to try to help stabilize the continent. He views it as not only a market for our own goods and resources, but as a playing field in this Cold War chess game that nobody is considering. And here's a map that shows you the various countries of Africa and the years in which they get their independence. You don't necessarily need to color this, although we might be doing an activity with this in class. So just kind of examine this for a few moments. He's also going to increase a lot of spending and aid with the Peace Corps again to Latin American countries. They were battling communists all over the place down there. Plus, you had a lot of Nazi leaders who were hiding in Latin and South America. And so he's going to create this program called the Alliance for Progress, which is going to give billions of dollars to Latin American countries. And the idea was that we would give them the money, and then in exchange, it was like us buying those countries into becoming democratic. The biggest problem with this is that the leaders of these Latin and South American countries were often corrupt, and so they didn't use the money wisely. There's also a baby boom in Latin America that's going to increase the amount of aid that they needed, but we were not aware of this, and so our aid wasn't actually enough. And very often the money didn't trickle down into the hands of the citizens. The politicians just kind of kept it for themselves.